The impossible mission. The war had dragged on for years. Humans and the alien giants known as the Draxians had fought across countless worlds. Every battle ended the same, with heavy losses, broken promises, and deeper hatred. Peace seemed impossible. Inside the gray walls of the human command center, the air was heavy with smoke and tension. Generals argued over maps and holograms, their voices sharp and hopeless. They needed something new, something desperate. General Voss, a tall man with deep scars across his face, slammed his fist against the table. "They will never surrender," he said. "But there is another way." The others fell silent, listening. "The Draxians have an ancient right," Voss continued. "A bond. It is rare, dangerous, but if one human can complete it with one of their giants, the war could end." The room exploded into protests. "No human can survive it. The giants hate us." "It's suicide." Voss raised his hand. "We do not need many. We need only one." An uneasy silence followed. Then someone asked, "Who would be foolish enough to try?" At the far end of the room, a young soldier stepped forward. His name was Jonas Hale. He was not the strongest nor the smartest, but his eyes held something the others had lost: hope. "I'll do it," he said simply. The generals stared at him, some with pity, some with disbelief. "Do you understand what you're volunteering for?" Voss asked, his voice softer now. Jonas nodded. "If there's a chance to end this, even a small one, I'll take it." The next day, Jonas stood alone on the barren plains where the meeting would take place. He wore no armor, carried no weapons, only a simple uniform and a small translator device clipped to his ear. The ground shook beneath his boots. From the hills, a figure appeared, a 9-foot-tall Draxian warrior. The giant moved with heavy steps, his silver skin gleaming under the twin suns. His muscles rippled like waves beneath thick armor plates. His face was sharp, alien, but there was something deeply human in the way his bright yellow eyes studied Jonas. The giant's name was Kyarzul. He was known among his kind as a fierce fighter, a leader, and a destroyer of human armies. Now, he had been ordered to stand before a human and decide if the ancient bond could be formed. Kyarzul stopped a few steps away, towering over Jonas. He folded his arms across his chest and growled low in his throat. Jonas swallowed hard but held his ground. The translator buzzed. A deep voice echoed in Jonas's ear. "You are small," Kyarzul said. Jonas smiled slightly. "I hear that a lot." Kyarzul's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, lowering his massive head until it was level with Jonas's. "You fear me," he said. "Yes," Jonas admitted, his voice steady. "But I am here anyway." For a moment, the two stood in silence. The wind whipped around them, carrying dust across the empty field. Kyarzul reached out one huge hand. Jonas tensed but did not move. The giant's fingers brushed against Jonas's chest, feeling the rapid beat of his human heart. "You have courage," Kyarzul said almost to himself. Then he turned and began to walk away. Jonas felt his heart sink. Was that it? Had he failed? But then Kyarzul paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Follow," he said. Hope sparked in Jonas's chest. He took a deep breath and followed the giant across the plain, toward the ancient valley where the first bond trial would begin. In the command center miles away, General Voss watched the scene through a distant drone feed. A slow smile spread across his scarred face. He might just do it, Voss muttered. But not everyone shared his hope. In the shadows of the base, a group of officers whispered angrily among themselves. "We cannot allow this," one said. "If the bond succeeds, everything will change," another hissed. "We must stop it, no matter the cost." Jonas had taken the first step on a path that could save 2 worlds, but he had no idea how many enemies waited. For him, some wore alien armor, and some wore human faces. As the sun dipped below the jagged mountains, Jonas walked deeper into the unknown, his heart pounding with fear and hope. Ahead, the ancient valley waited, and Kyarzul, the 9-foot giant, walked beside him, not as a friend yet, not as an enemy, but as a mystery. Only time would tell if Courage was enough to turn a soldier and a giant into something more, something that could change the fate of a galaxy. Meeting the giant, the ancient valley stretched out before them like the bones of a long-dead beast. Broken stones, sharp cliffs, and rivers of dust cut deep scars across the land. High above, black birds circled in the red sky, their cries sharp and cold. Jonas followed Kar-Zul into the heart of the valley, his boots sinking into the dry ground. Every step felt heavier, every breath tasted of iron and ash. Kar-Zul said nothing. The giant moved with slow, powerful strides, his massive body casting a long shadow over the smaller human. Jonas had never felt so small, so fragile. But he did not stop. After what felt like hours, they reached a stone circle carved into the valley floor. Ancient symbols glowed faintly on the rocks. The air inside the circle was thick, almost alive. Kar-Zul turned to face Jonas. The translator buzzed in his ear. "This is the place," Kar-Zul said. "The bond begins here." Jonas looked around nervously. "What do I have to do?" Kar-Zul's yellow eyes studied him carefully. "You must survive me." Before Jonas could ask what that meant, Kar-Zul lunged forward. The giant's massive hand closed around Jonas's chest, lifting him off the ground like a toy. Jonas gasped, struggling for breath. "Fight," Kar-Zul growled. Jonas kicked, punched, tried to break free, but it was like hitting a mountain. His heart pounded wildly. Fear screamed in his mind. Was this a trick? Had he been led here just to die? No. He remembered General Voss's words. Only one human needed to bond. Only one needed the courage to try. Jonas stopped struggling. He forced himself to meet Kar-Zul's fierce gaze. "I will not fight you," he said, gasping for air. "I am not your enemy." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Kar-Zul roared, a sound so loud it shook the stones. He dropped Jonas onto the ground roughly, but did not attack again. Instead, he crouched down, bringing his massive face close to Jonas. "You do not fear death?" he asked. Jonas wiped blood from his lip and looked up. "I fear losing this chance," he said. "I fear what happens if we fail." Kar-Zul studied him for a long time. Then slowly he reached out his hand, palm open. "Stand," he said. Jonas hesitated, then took the offered hand. The giant's fingers wrapped gently around his own, lifting him to his feet. The bond trial had begun, but the hardest part was still to come. Kar-Zul turned and pointed toward the mountains, at the far end of the valley. "There," he said, "the shrine of trials. We must reach it before night falls." Jonas frowned. "What happens at night?" Kar-Zul's eyes darkened. "The valley wakes." No more words were needed. They moved quickly, the sun already sinking lower in the sky. As they climbed the broken paths and crossed crumbling bridges, Jonas began to notice strange things, symbols carved deep into the rocks that glowed softly as they passed, shadows moving in the corners of his eyes, whispers riding the wind, speaking in a language he could not understand. Kar-Zul did not speak, but Jonas could feel the tension in the giant's body. Something ancient and dangerous lived in this valley, something that hated both human and Draxian alike. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The red sun disappeared behind the mountains, and a deep, unnatural darkness swallowed the land. From the cliffs above, pale shapes began to crawl down toward them, creatures twisted by time and hate, the cursed remains of those who had failed the bond long ago. Jonas gripped a broken spear he had found earlier. Kar-Zul raised his massive fists, his body glowing faintly with energy. "Stay close," the giant growled. The first of the cursed ones reached them, screeching and snapping with rotten teeth. Jonas fought desperately, striking and dodging, but the creatures were many. Kar-Zul fought like a living storm, smashing and throwing the cursed ones away with brutal force. But more came, and more. Jonas's arms ached. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead. Fear clawed at his mind. They could not win this fight. Kar-Zul slammed a creature into the ground and roared. "The shrine!" he shouted. "We must reach it." Jonas nodded, pushing his body to move faster. following the faint glow of ancient symbols leading up the path. Behind them, the cursed army grew. Ahead, the shrine waited. A small circle of stones, glowing with a light that seemed to call out to them. They ran with everything they had left, the screams of the cursed ones chasing them through the darkness. As they reached the shrine, a wall of pure energy rose around the stones, blocking the cursed ones from entering. Jonas collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Karzul stood tall beside him, his chest heaving, his eyes fierce. They had survived the first trial, but the real bond, the true test of trust, had only just begun, and in the shadows beyond the shrine, darker things waited, things that would not be so easily defeated. The first test. The ancient shrine stood silent around Jonas and Karzul. The energy wall shimmered in the cold air, casting strange patterns of light on the broken ground. Outside the barrier, the cursed ones prowled in frustration, their twisted bodies writhing, their hollow eyes filled with endless hunger. Inside the circle, there was only silence and the heavy breath of two survivors. Jonas sat slumped against a stone, his muscles aching, every cut and bruise burning like fire. Karzul stood nearby, still watchful, his massive body tense and ready. "You fought well," Karzul said finally, his voice deep and steady. Jonas managed a weak smile. "Not well enough. I nearly died back there." Karzul crouched down, his giant frame moving with surprising grace. "Survival is enough," he said. "For now." Jonas wiped blood from his forehead and looked around. The shrine was beautiful in a sad way, old, broken, yet still alive with power. The symbols carved into the stones pulsed softly, like the beating heart of something ancient and waiting. Karzul stood and walked to the center of the shrine. There in the middle of the stone circle stood a massive obelisk, cracked but still standing tall. He placed his palm against it and the stones began to hum. The translator buzzed in Jonas's ear. "The first test begins now," Karzul said. Jonas struggled to his feet, his heart pounding. "What kind of test?" he asked. Karzul's yellow eyes glowed faintly in the half-light. "A test of trust," he said. "Of fear, of spirit." The ground beneath them shifted. The world seemed to spin, and Jonas fell to his knees, dizzy and disoriented. The shrine faded away. He found himself standing alone in a vast, empty space, a place of pure darkness. No sky, no ground, no walls, only darkness and silence. "Karzul?" Jonas called out, his voice echoing strangely. No answer. He turned in a slow circle, searching for any sign of the giant. Then the darkness moved. Shapes began to form. Shapes from his worst memories. Battles he had fought and lost. Friends he had seen die. Choices he regretted. Fears he had buried deep inside. They came at him from all sides. Visions, voices, hands reaching out to drag him down. "You will fail," they whispered. "You are weak. You will die alone." Jonas fell to his knees, covering his ears, trying to shut out the voices. But they were not just in his ears. They were inside him, inside his mind, inside his heart. He squeezed. His eyes shut and thought of Karzul, the giant who had not killed him when he had the chance. The giant who had chosen to stand beside him, even when every instinct must have screamed to do otherwise. Trust. He had trusted Karzul. Now, he had to trust himself. He forced himself to stand, shaking with fear but standing anyway. "I am not alone," he said aloud. The voices hissed in anger. The darkness trembled. He took a step forward, then another, pushing through the wall of fear. He stumbled, fell, but got up again. Finally, through the swirling darkness, he saw a faint light, a door made of pure white energy, and standing before it was Karzul. The giant looked at him with calm, steady eyes. "You came," Karzul said. "I said I would," Jonas replied, his voice stronger now. Karzul nodded and stepped aside, letting Jonas pass through the door. The darkness shattered. The shrine returned. Jonas collapsed onto the cold stone floor, gasping for air, sweat pouring from his body. Karzul knelt beside him. "You faced your fear," he said. Jonas laughed weakly. "Felt more like I got crushed by it." Karzul smiled, a rare, strange expression on his alien face. "Yet you stood." The stones around them pulsed brighter, their light growing stronger. The first bond between human and Draxian had begun to form. But even as hope stirred in the air, trouble brewed outside. Far beyond the mountains, in hidden chambers filled with whispers and lies, human leaders watched Jonas's progress with growing fear. They had sent spies into the valley. They had prepared plans to destroy the bond if it ever became real. For them, peace was a threat. And Jonas Hale, the simple soldier who dared to, trust an alien giant, had just become the most dangerous man in the galaxy. As Jonas and Karzul prepared for the next trial, shadows moved toward them, shadows that would not be defeated by strength or courage alone. The real fight was only beginning. The enemy within, the shrine's light slowly faded, leaving behind a soft, comforting glow. Jonas sat quietly by the stones, his head resting against the cold ground. Every part of him ached, but deep inside, he felt something new. A small, unbreakable thread connecting him to Karzul. The giant sat nearby, sharpening a massive blade with slow, deliberate movements. He said nothing, but Jonas could feel the bond between them growing stronger, like roots digging deep into the soil. They had survived the first test, but survival was not enough. Far away, hidden behind jagged cliffs, unseen by either Jonas or Karzul, a group of humans watched through high-powered scopes. Their uniforms were dark, their faces grim. They were not here to help. They were here to stop the bond. "Target confirmed," whispered one into a small communicator. "The human and the giant have completed Phase 1. Orders?" The reply crackled through the device. "Proceed with sabotage. No witnesses." The men nodded and moved like shadows, slipping through the broken rocks toward the shrine. Inside the shrine, Karzul's sharp senses caught a shift in the air. He stiffened, his yellow eyes narrowing. "We are not alone," he said in a low voice. Jonas jumped to his feet, adrenaline rushing back into his tired body. "You sure?" Karzul growled deep in his throat. "Very sure. They had only seconds before the attack." Without waiting, Karzul moved toward Jonas, grabbing a heavy piece of broken stone and handing it to him like a shield. "Stay close," he ordered. Jonas nodded, clutching the stone with shaking hands. The first shot came from the cliffs, a thin line of blue energy that sizzled through the air and shattered against the stone floor. Karzul roared and threw his blade. It spun through the air like a flash of silver lightning and struck one of the hidden men, sending him tumbling from the rocks with a scream. But more shots followed, dozens of them, filling the air with deadly heat. Jonas and Karzul moved, quickly, dodging behind ancient stones, using the shrine's broken walls as cover. Jonas's mind raced. Why were humans attacking him? Why now, when the bond was so close to completion? Karzul seemed to know the answer. "They fear what we will." "Come," he said, his voice full of quiet rage. "They fear change." More explosions rocked the shrine, shaking the stones. Jonas peeked around a broken wall and saw them. Human soldiers, heavily armed, faces hidden behind black masks, his own people, trying to kill him. Anger burned inside Jonas, fierce and painful. He had come here to build peace, and now his own kind wanted him dead for it. Karzul touched his shoulder, grounding him. "We fight," the giant said. "Together." Jonas nodded. Together. They charged. Karzul moved like a storm, ripping through the attackers with brutal strength. Jonas followed close, using his stone shield to block shots and swinging it hard when enemies got too close. The battle was fierce, chaotic. Blood stained the ancient shrine. But Jonas and Karzul fought as one, their bond making them faster, stronger, almost unstoppable. Finally, the last of the attackers fell. The shrine was silent once more. Jonas stood trembling, blood dripping, from a cut on his arm, his chest heaving. Karzul knelt beside a fallen soldier and ripped the mask away. Jonas gasped. The face was familiar. a man from his own base, a fellow soldier he had trained with. Karzul looked at Jonas, his expression grim. "Your enemy is not just out there," he said, pointing toward the distant mountains. "Your enemy is within." Jonas stared at the dead man, feeling something cold settle into his heart. They would not stop. They would send more. They would destroy him and Karzul if they could, not because they hated the Draxians, but because they feared what peace could bring. He clenched his fists. "Let them come," he said, his voice low and steady. Karzul smiled. "A rare and terrible thing. They will." As the twin moons rose above the valley, casting long shadows across the broken stones, Jonas and Karzul prepared for what was to come. They had survived betrayal. They had survived fear. But the true test, the test that would decide not just their fates but the fate of two entire species, still waited ahead, and in the dark corners of space new enemies gathered, sharper and deadlier than anything they had faced before. The bond between a human and a giant had been forged. Now it would be tested in fire. The breaking point. The valley had turned into a graveyard of broken stones and fallen dreams. The shrine lay shattered, the sacred walls torn apart by battle. Dust and smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Jonas leaned heavily against a broken pillar, his vision blurred from pain and exhaustion. Karzul stood nearby, his massive frame bruised and bleeding, but his yellow eyes still burning with fierce light. They had survived the ambush, but at a terrible cost. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. The bond between them, once a thread of hope, now weighed like chains on Jonas's soul. He could feel Karzul's pain as if it were his own. The giant's anger, fear, and silent sorrow flowed through their connection, drowning him. "We cannot stop," Karzul said, his voice rough like gravel. "The shrine of final judgment is close." Jonas nodded, though his legs shook beneath him. They moved slowly across the cracked land, following the ancient path toward the last shrine, the place where their bond would be sealed or broken forever. As they climbed a narrow cliff, the skies above darkened. Thunder rumbled in the distance and cold rain began to fall, turning the dust to mud. Every sound made Jonas flinch. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy. Karzul moved carefully, shielding Jonas when he could, but even he was weakening. Then the trap was sprung. A roar split the air, and from the cliffs above, a massive Draxian warrior dropped down, landing between Jonas and Karzul with a thunderous crash. This was no cursed creature. This was one of Karzul's own kind, but not an ally. Karzul stiffened. "Sarvak," he said, his voice filled with old hatred. The new giant towered even higher than Karzul, his armor black as night, his eyes cold and cruel. "You shame us," Sarvak spat, his voice dripping with disgust. "Bonding with a human, surrendering our blood." Karzul said nothing. Sarvak drew a massive blade from his back, its edge crackling with dark energy. "I will end this mistake," he snarled. Before Jonas could react, Sarvak attacked. Karzul met him head-on, the ground shaking under their clash. Jonas stumbled back, watching in horror as the two giants battled. Every blow was like a hammer strike, every roar a thunderclap. Karzul fought with everything he had, but he was tired, wounded, and carrying the weight of the bond. Sarvak was fresh, full of fury. With a brutal strike, Sarvak slammed his blade into Karzul's side, sending the giant crashing to the ground. Jonas shouted and rushed forward without thinking. He threw himself between Sarvak and Karzul, holding up a broken spear like a toy against a storm. Sarvak laughed, a deep, cruel sound. "You think you can stop me, little one?" Jonas's hand shook, but he stood firm. "I don't need to stop you," he said. "I just need to remind him why he fights." Karzul stirred, lifting his head. Their bond flared to life. Jonas poured every feeling into it, his fear, his pain, his stubborn hope. He sent it all into Karzul, and the giant roared back to life. With a surge of power, Karzul rose, grabbing Sarvak by the arm and twisting with impossible strength. Bones cracked. Sarvak screamed. Karzul slammed him to the ground with a force that shook the cliffs. The black-armored giant lay still, defeated, Karzul turned to Jonas, blood dripping from a deep wound, his body trembling from the effort. "You stood for me," he said, voice rough. "You stood for me first," Jonas replied, smiling through the pain. Karzul knelt, lowering his head in a gesture of deep respect. The bond between them burned brighter than ever, no longer just survival or duty. It was loyalty. It was trust. It was brotherhood. But they had little time to celebrate. Above them, on the cliffs, more shadows gathered. Human soldiers, Draxian purists, mercenaries paid in blood and fear. They had not expected Jonas and Karzul to survive the test. Now they would do anything to destroy them before the bond could be completed. Jonas and Karzul stood side by side, facing the coming storm. This was the breaking point. One more step and there would be no turning back. Either they would forge a new future together, or they would fall together, forgotten by the stars. The true bond. The night swallowed the valley, whole. No stars, no moon, only endless black stretching in all directions. But even in the dark, Jonas and Karzul stood strong, their bond a light no storm could smother. Across the cliffs, enemies gathered like wolves, human soldiers in black armor, Draxian warriors with blades longer than Jonas was tall and silent, mercenaries with dead eyes, all drawn together by one purpose, to stop the bond, to kill the hope that Jonas and Karzul had built. Karzul knelt beside Jonas, their shoulders touching lightly. Their wounds were many. Their energy was low, but their spirit was unbroken. "This is the end," Jonas whispered, looking at the army facing them. "No," Karzul growled, his voice low and steady. "This is the beginning." Karzul rose to his full height, towering against the darkness. He pulled a small crystal from the pouch at his belt. It glowed faintly. The bond stone, the sacred artifact that sealed the connection between two souls. "Are you ready?" he asked Jonas. Jonas, though bruised and bleeding, nodded without hesitation. "With you," he said. Karzul pressed the bond stone to his chest. Jonas placed his hand over it. The stone pulsed once, then shattered into 1,000 shards of light. The pieces melted into their skin, into their blood, into their bones. The bond was complete, and the change began. A wave of raw energy exploded outward, knocking dust and debris into the air. Jonas felt it instantly. Strength poured into his veins, not his own, but shared with Karzul. He could feel the giant's heart beating alongside his own. His fear faded, replaced by fierce determination. Karzul roared, the sound echoing across the mountains. The bond was no longer a fragile thread. It was a chain of steel, unbreakable, forged by trust, pain, and hope. The army watching from the cliffs hesitated. They had heard rumors of the true bond, but none had ever seen it. Until now. Karzul picked up a massive stone, lifting it as easily as a child would lift a feather. Jonas gripped a broken spear, the weapon feeling lighter than ever before. Side by side, human and giant stepped forward. The enemy opened fire. Energy bolts screamed through the air, lighting up the darkness like fireworks. But Jonas and Karzul moved together, faster than before, their steps perfectly matched. Karzul blocked blasts with his thick armor, his massive body protecting Jonas. Jonas weaved through the chaos, striking with deadly precision, every movement guided by Karzul's instincts. They were not two warriors anymore. They were one. Fear spread through the enemy ranks like wildfire. They had come expecting an easy kill. Instead, they faced something new, something they could not understand, something they could not defeat. Soldiers broke ranks, running into the night. Draxian warriors dropped their weapons and fled. The mercenaries, loyal only to gold, vanished into the shadows. Within minutes, the battlefield was empty. Only Jonas and Karzul remained, standing victorious among the ruins. Jonas dropped to one knee, gasping for air. Karzul knelt beside him, resting a giant hand on his shoulder. "You are strong," the giant said. Jonas smiled weakly. "Only because of you." Karzul shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Because of us." The bond had saved them. The bond had changed them. But their journey was not over. Beyond the valley, across the stars, others would hear what happened here. Some would come with hope, others with fear. The war was not finished. But tonight, against all odds, a human and a giant had done the impossible. They had trusted, they had bonded, and they had become the beginning of a new world. Warriors of a new world. The dawn was slow to rise over the valley. Soft, golden light spilled across the shattered stones, revealing the ruins of a battlefield where an impossible victory had been won. Jonas and Ka-Zul stood side by side, their bodies bruised, their wounds raw, but their spirits stronger than steel. The bond between them burned brighter than ever, pulsing with a life of its own. They were no longer just human and Draxian. They were brothers, warriors of a new world. As the first rays of sunlight touched the broken shrine, a distant rumble filled the air. Ka-Zul tensed, his yellow eyes narrowing. "More are coming," he said. Jonas tightened his grip on his spear. "Friends or enemies?" Ka-Zul shook his head slowly. "Both." From the cliffs, figures began to appear, hundreds of them. Some were human soldiers, armor battered and faces grim. Others were Draxians, taller and stronger, their skin gleaming under the morning light. They marched slowly, weapons lowered, unsure what they would find. At the front of the group walked General Voss, his old face hard to read. He stopped a few paces, from Jonas and Ka-Zul, looking at them for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He dropped his weapon. The others hesitated, then slowly, one by one, humans and Draxians alike lowered their arms. The war was not over yet, but something had changed. Something real. Voss stepped forward, his boots crunching on the broken stones. "We heard the stories," he said, his voice rough. "We didn't believe them." He looked at Jonas, then at Ka-Zul. "Now we see the truth." Jonas said nothing. He let his actions speak louder than words. Ka-Zul placed a massive hand on Jonas's shoulder and spoke, his deep voice rolling across the silent valley. This human faced death without fear. He trusted where others hated. He stood where others fell. The Draxian warriors bowed their heads slightly, a sign of deep respect among their kind. Jonas stepped forward. "The war between us can end today," he said, "but only if we choose trust over fear." The silence was heavy, stretching long enough for doubt to creep in. Then Voss nodded. "Then let it end." The soldiers and giants moved closer, not as enemies, but as something new, something fragile but powerful. "Trust." Ka-Zul turned to Jonas, a rare smile touching his sharp features. "You are no longer just a soldier," he said. "You are the first of the bonded." Jonas laughed softly, the sound filled with relief and wonder. "First of many, I hope," he said. Together, human and giant led the march out of the valley. Behind them, the shrine of ancient bonds crumbled into dust, its purpose fulfilled. Ahead of them, across broken lands and wounded worlds, waited a future not yet written. It would not be easy. There would be battle still. There would be fear. There would be those who clung to hatred. But there would also be hope. Hope carried by a bond forged in blood and trust. Hope carried by warriors who refused to let the past define them. As the sun rose higher, Jonas and Ka-Zul walked side by side into the new day, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as warriors of a new world.